Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to get started in just another minute as folks are still coming into the room. All right, I think we're going to kick this off. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lizzie Wyant, and I am the Deputy Executive Director here at MAPC. We are really excited to talk about some of the important victories from this past year's legislative session, and some policy priorities that legislative leadership are still prioritizing, and we hope will make it across the finish line. We'll also talk to you a little bit about how you can help us get these priorities across the finish line, both this fall and as the next legislative session begins in January. One bit of housekeeping as a reminder, we are recording this webinar so that we can share it online at a later date. And folks should feel free to put your questions in the Q&A block. We'll be answering some of those questions in real time and some of the questions at the end, where hopefully we'll leave some time for good questions. We do have some dignitaries in the Zoom room with us today, and I just want to thank those of you who took time out of your busy schedule to join us. Really appreciate folks who came from legislative offices, and we'll be sure to call out shout outs to legislators who've also joined. And there was a ton of interest in this, so we're really excited to be able to do this. As a note, I just want to say that unlike many of our sister planning agencies across the country, MAPC has had a government affairs arm since we were created in statute over 6 years ago. We do all of the things that regional planning agencies across the country do to help our cities and towns and our region plan better. But we also advocate for policy changes at the state and federal level. Our legislative and policy advocacy complements our planning work, and we are guided by our regional plan, Metro Common 2050, and also our state of equity policy agenda. Before the team gets into the details of what happened this legislative session, I'm going to turn it over to our Government Affairs Director, Leah Robbins, to remind us about the intricacies of the legislative process. Thank you again for being here today.
Hi, everyone. Good morning, or good afternoon, I guess, at this point. So I am Leah Robbins. I'm director of the government affairs team here at MAPC. If you go to the next slide, please. So what is a general court? I just want to really baseline start us. We have 200 legislators elected every 2 years, 160 representatives, 40 senators, and the MAPC region is well represented in both of those branches. We generally refer to the session itself as the general court, and we are right now in the 193rd here in Massachusetts. In the first year of each legislative session is generally when bills are filed. There's debates, there's committee hearings on all of these bills. And then in the second year, all of the committees have to wrap up their work of reviewing legislation based on the rules. They can always change the rules and give themselves more time if necessary. And those bills continue to move through. So the one constant in both years of our legislative calendar is a fiscal year budget. So that is something that you've heard us talk about many times throughout the years. So that's a little bit about what a general court is. Next slide. And I just want to show up, back one, yep, how bills become a law. Just really quickly, some of the many steps that it takes for a bill to become a law in Massachusetts. I know many folks on this call are very familiar with these steps, but I just want to sort of remind the first, I'd say 5 steps are things that most bills are going to have complete. They're going to have a hearing, an opportunity for legislators and members of the public to explain why a proposal is necessary. And then those committees are going to have to make a decision on if that bill is something that should move forward and advance for further consideration, or if it needs more study, or if it needs to be combined with another proposal. Most bills have some sort of fiscal component, so they end up getting reviewed by Ways and Means committees, though that's not a formal step in the process for every bill. And then I just want to call out on the right side of the column for you. Every bill has to get approved by both chambers, and they have to be the same from both chambers. So what we have seen, and what you'll be hearing from us about today, is many of those bills that are at that like almost penultimate stage at the conference committee step, where legislators are negotiating out those differences that happened between the branches. So it is very few bills that reach it to that point, but there are many that we care deeply about at MAPC that are still under consideration at different points. But today, we're going to focus on those that are really at the conference committee step. And then just to name two, the governor has different options when a bill reaches her desk. There are 10 days to make a decision about signing or vetoing. And options if it is a fiscal bill for the governor to veto or make recommendations on specific sections. So with that general framing of bills and their process over the 2-year session in Massachusetts, I want to turn now to the heart of the matter for why I think a lot of you are here today, is talking about kind of what recently passed at the end of the legislative session. So next slide, please. So I just want to name, there's been a lot of focus on what hasn't been accomplished in the waning hours of the legislative session, but a number of priorities really did make it to the governor's desk for her signatures. You see in the picture there. I'm going to talk about a few of them, and then I will turn it over to my colleague Norman Abbott, MAPC Senior Government Affairs Specialist, to talk us through a few others. So maternal health was just recently signed into law on the 23rd of August. So really business is continuing to happen even after the end of formal sessions. Again, it might seem non-traditional for a planning agency to be discussing maternal health, but Metro Common really speaks to the need for all people to achieve a healthy start in life and for improved health outcomes, for birthing people and infants. As I think a lot of folks on this call know, women die from pregnancy-related complications in the US at a higher rate than any other high-income country, and Black and Indigenous women face that at an even higher rate. And racism, not race, is the primary driving force between those disparities. So this new law that was put into place is really going to get at some of those complications that are arising because of racism in our system. So what we were really excited about to see as an agency is the overhaul of maternal health practices and expanded coverage for midwifery, lactation consultants, birth centers, doulas, and screening and treatment for postpartum depression. This goes hand in hand with some expansions in mass health coverage last year. And with 40% of births in Massachusetts covered by mass health, these changes are going to be huge. I also want to call out the gun safety legislation that passed and was signed into law this summer. Some of the main things that I want to draw attention to here are updates in statute related to ghost guns and 3D printed guns, to have some improved safety around how those are handled, updating the red flag law and the extreme risk protection order status process. And of note for municipal staff in particular, there's a prohibition against carrying firearms into certain public places with some flexibility for municipalities in terms of the fine structure for violations. And as lovers of data, as I know many of you are, there are some changes made to firearm data collection, analysis, and publication. This all sort of came out of the Supreme Court's decision in the Bruin case, and includes some additional sections that really reflect what were necessary here in Massachusetts. I'm going to turn it over to Norman now to talk us through a little bit about what happened in the fiscal 25 budget and in the PFAS legislation.
Hi, everyone. My name is Norman Abbott. I'm the Senior Government Affairs Specialist. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. So as some of you may know, on July 29th, the governor signed the FY25 fiscal budget into law. It's a $57.8 billion budget. which is roughly a 3.5% increase over last year's final budget. We're very excited that all of our major priorities, including district local technical assistance, the grant assistance program, and the Senator Charles Shannon Community Safety Initiative, were level funded in both FY24 and 25. We're incredibly grateful to the governor, the Senate president, the speaker, the chairs of House and Senate Ways and Means for developing a budget that will truly serve municipalities and RPAs across Massachusetts. Additionally, the budget made significant investments in childcare. It made the C3 grants permanent, which provide funding for rate increases for early education and care to subsidize salaries, benefits, and stipends. These are non-competitive grants that are eligible for EEC licensed childcare providers. It also included one of MAPC's newest legislative priorities, the development of an environmental justice trust fund. The fund can be used to restore natural resources, provide remediation and mitigation for any environmental pollution or harm in a disadvantaged community, as well as benefit community health and research. Some other great notable additions were the inclusion of a $2.5 million pilot for council, which will allow MLAC to provide legal representation for low-income tenants and low-income owners and occupants during eviction proceedings. A $7 million increase to RAF, which is the Residential Assistance or Families in Transition program. And included $326 million for the emergency shelter program as well. One of the areas that we advocated for that we didn't see as much action go our way was around the fair share funding. This year had probably the least equitable split of fair share funding between education, which received $762 million, or roughly 58% of the funding, and transportation, which received $538 million, which is roughly 41% of the funding. For comparison, last year in the fiscal year 24, transportation received $477 million and education received $524 million. So that's roughly a 52-47 split. MAPC, shifting gears a little bit, MAPC was proud to support Senator Sear and Rep. Hogan's PFAS bill this session. While that particular bill didn't make it over the finish line, Massachusetts did become the second state after Connecticut to ban intentionally added PFAS to firefighter turnout gear. While no PFAS gear has been approved by the National Fire Protection Association, some municipalities outside of the Commonwealth are field testing PFAS-free gear with the goal of transitioning the middle of 2026, which will line up perfectly with the law, which mandates the no gear be sold with PFAS by the end of 2026. A couple of bills to mention very, very quickly before I turn it over to Matt and Andrea to talk about the Affordable Homes Act. The legislature also passed the Parentage Act, which updates Massachusetts statute to provide clarity on how to establish parentage. So children in all families, including LGBTQ families and families formed through assisted reproduction, have access to legal rights. They also passed a comprehensive animal welfare bill, which prohibits traveling acts like circuses, carnivals, and fairs from using certain wild animals for entertainment. And they also passed a veterans bill called the HERO Act, which expands benefits for veterans and modernizing services. Now I'm going to turn things over to Matt and Andrea to talk about probably one of the biggest things that was signed towards the end of the legislative session, the Affordable Housing Act.
Thank you very much, Norman. And thanks everyone for being on today. My name is Matt Walsh. I am a government affairs policy analyst here on the government affairs team here at MAPC. And as Norman said, some of the most consequential wins for MAPC this past session are in the Affordable Homes Act. It is the largest investment in housing in the Commonwealth history, with bond authorizations just over $5 billion. That's a lot more than double the last housing bond bill that we saw passed in 2018. So those authorizations really, I think, meet the moment that we're in with our housing crisis. Before we get into the substance, I just want to take a moment to thank the administration, both Governor Healy and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, Speaker Mariano, Senate President Spilka, and Chairs Arcero and Edwards in particular for this bill. There was a lot of work that went into it, from the first 11-hour hearing, which seems like it was a decade ago, but was just over a year ago. And also want to thank the conferees, Senator Brownsberger, who is actually on with us today. Thank you for being here, Senator. Chairman Michaelwitz, Rep. DeCoste, and Senator Durant, as well as the whole team at HLC. all of them were a real pleasure to work with throughout the process. And like I said, hours and hours got poured into this bill. So want to make sure that we appreciate those hours of work. So I want to start off by just reminding folks that bond authorizations are different than direct spending. So these authorize the governor to issue bonds in the amounts in the bill. And then over time, those will be programmed through the capital investment plan. And we will need to continue advocating for some of these dollars to make it out the door, but this bill makes it all possible. So I'll start off talking about some of those investments, the largest of which is a $2 billion bond authorization for state-funded public housing, improvements generally, as well as $150 million for decarbonization. Our state-funded public housing units are some of the best assets that we have in providing truly affordable housing for Massachusetts residents. And we do have quite the inventory, larger than most other states. And the challenge in having such an impressive inventory of state-funded public housing is maintaining it. And this $2 billion will help us to, catch up with a lot of the backlog that we have seen because of that challenge. And in addition, that $150 million for decarbonization will help to make sure that the folks in these units have, more efficient appliances, that they have a good building envelope so that they can, save money on electric bills, or the local housing authority can save money on electric bills, and that they can have more comfortable places. I think, this summer has taught us a lot about the impacts of extreme heat, and those decarbonization upgrades can help to keep those units cooler. We also saw $800 million invested in the Affordable Housing Trust, $425 million for the Housing Stabilization and Investment Trust Fund. Those are really the workforce housing production programs in the Commonwealth. You will rarely see a development that has affordable units included that don't make use of those two funds to a certain extent. So that's really critical for driving the production that we need across the state to close the gaps that we have in our housing inventory. We also saw $275 million for sustainable and green housing initiatives. So similar to the decarbonization funding included in the local housing authority item, this will allow us to make efficiency upgrades in a wider variety of buildings, not just public housing, but also in larger developments throughout the state. Really critical to make sure that all residents can be a part of the clean energy transition. And we know that many residents won't be able to do that without some help. So those dollars will make sure that they can come with us in accessing clean energy and the benefits that it offers. Finally, $175 million for the Housing Works infrastructure program. That is essentially a new housing focused split off of the old MassWorks program, which many of you will be familiar with. And that will help to ensure that insufficient infrastructure doesn't become the barrier to housing production. $175 million isn't going to build all the infrastructure that we need to support all the development we need to beat this housing crisis, but it is a really, really important start. And then closing, there was also $10 million included for the Small Properties Acquisition Fund, which helps to purchase and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing, which is essentially affordable housing that exists without a subsidy. So it'll make sure that those units can stay affordable, because many people have made the comparison of, if we are not preserving the affordable units that we have now, and we are just building units, we are trying to fill a bathtub with the drain open. So this helps to close that drain. And now we'll move on to the policy elements. Those are not all of the funding elements. It is a huge bill, so we can't go through every one, or we'd be here all day. But wanted to cover some of those top ones. And Tim, if you could turn to the next slide, please. So There are a lot of important policy wins in this bill, both long-term MAPC priorities and other just notable inclusions that weren't on MAPC's priority list. The top, and something that MAPC has been advocating for quite some time, is ADUs by right. That was a major recommendation of not only MetroCommon, our long-run regional plan, but also of Living Little, a report that we did back in 2018, focusing on missing middle housing types, and making it easier, removing zoning barriers to ADU development was huge. Excuse me, in both of those documents. It's a really good way to make sure that we use our existing buildings to make the most of those for housing. And in the medium term, because these ADUs can come online a lot faster than total new builds. But unfortunately, they can't come online immediately, but they're a little bit quicker than the other long-term investments that we expect to come to fruition over the coming years. But that still leaves the short term, and we were glad to see a number of policy measures that do help folks in the short term. The bill created an Office of Fair Housing, which it will be the first statewide entity that's responsible not just for enforcing fair housing, which we do have statewide entities who are responsible for, the Attorney General's office and the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, but actually affirmatively furthering fair housing. So looking to see what more we can do to make sure people understand through educational efforts what their responsibilities as a landlord or their rights as a tenant are. And also doing testing to see where there may be discrimination happening in the housing market, and making recommendations so that we can better tackle housing discrimination across the board. The bill also established a process to seal eviction records. That's a process that had not existed prior. So essentially, if you had an eviction record, that would stick with you for life. And if you were, a young person, a child of somebody who had an eviction and your name was on the lease, that included you. So it really was kind of a life sentence of housing instability. Establishing this process makes it so that that is no longer the case, which is really huge, and I think an important way to remove barriers between people and housing that does exist. We also saw included a foreclosure mediation pilot that will build partnerships between borrowers and creditors in 5 communities with really high rates of foreclosure, and establish just what it says, a mediation process, so that you can really be sure that all of your pre-foreclosure options have been exhausted before moving to foreclosure, and that you've taken advantage of all the resources available, both through your lender, through the state, and any other means. So that concludes kind of the major MAPC priorities that were included in the bill. But I do want to mention just a few others. We also saw the seasonal communities designation included, which designates certain communities as seasonal communities and gives them some special tools to use to combat the challenges that they face as seasonal communities, including year-round use restrictions, so that they don't see their entire community turn into just a bunch of Airbnbs and no homes for the people who live and work there on a year-round basis. There was a change to condo conversion law that would essentially only now exempt owner-occupied units, even for smaller units, from the condo conversion protections that the Commonwealth has. There was a new supportive housing pool fund set up. Supportive housing being housing that provides kind of wraparound services to folks who are there, either because those folks are suffering from substance use disorder, or they're chronically homeless for another reason. Really any number of reasons that folks would need those wraparound services. Funding pools are really tough because many of the funding sources that we have now can provide either for housing or for services. So this just sets up a pool where both of those kind of types of expenses are eligible. So you don't need to worry so much about filling in the gaps with different types of funding and, splitting that funding into different pools. And then finally, there were some reforms to state surplus property disposition, wanting to make sure that any piece of state land that is going to be sold is used for the purposes that we need it for the most in the Commonwealth. And right now, one of those purposes certainly is housing and affordable housing. So the changes included would allow the governor to order a reuse determination from any department of the Commonwealth, or any department or subdivision of the Commonwealth, so that you can look and see if that parcel is still needed by the state entity that owns it. If not, we can start the process of seeing if we can use that parcel for housing. And it makes that process quite a bit quicker, and establishes a separate process for housing so that we can really get those units built. I also just want to note that there are a number of things that didn't make it across the finish line this session in the Affordable Homes Act that we're excited to keep working on next session, particularly the local option transfer fee, inclusionary zoning by simple majority, the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act, and a number of others. All of those things have made it closer in the Affordable Homes Act than they ever have before to becoming law. So I think we're very much encouraged by how close they made it, and excited to work with y'all to make sure that they make it through next session. Also, just want to say we're really grateful that the administration and legislative leaders have all really said that this is the first step. It's not going to be the silver bullet that's going to solve our housing crisis. It's a crisis that's been decades in the making, and it's going to be one that is probably decades in the fixing as well. So glad to see that, we're going to keep working on this. There are more tools that we do need to address our housing crisis. And finally, I will just note that we are in conversation with the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities about what the regulations behind some of these new laws will look like, particularly on accessory dwelling units by right. The administration, I believe, will be promulgating regulations to facilitate that change. We don't know what those will look like yet, but we are talking to the administration about what they'll look like, and are excited to have a pretty collaborative process moving there. And now I will turn it to Norman to talk a little bit about what did not yet make it across the finish line in this legislative session, and what might be going on in either informal sessions or in special sessions.
Hi, everybody. So as Matt mentioned, as of today, there are still 15 bills being considered by their respective conference committees, including the Climate Energy Siting Bill, the ACTEV Bond Bill, Hospital Oversight Bill, and more. Additionally, the final FY24 supplemental budget is still awaiting conferees. The good news is that there's been a lot of recent rumblings from both the House and the Senate that suggest that the Economic Development Bond Bill, perhaps the Energy Siting Bill, and others could still be finalized before a new session begins. So what's in the Economic Development Bond Bill, and what is it? Each session, the legislature attempts to pass an economic development bond bill. This is usually an opportunity to ensure that funding exists for crucial programs like mass work, and funds incentives to help the growth of crucial industries like climate and life sciences. It also provides a chance for legislators to secure funding for in-district projects and programs. As with other bills, the Conference Committee must reconcile these differences before an agreed-upon bill can pass. While many of the authorizations are similar to previous years, including $400 million for MassWorks, $30 million for the Brownfield Redevelopment Fund, $200 million respectively for the Clean Energy and Wind Industry Investment Trust Funds, the House opted to provide $500 million for the Life Sciences Capital Fund, which is roughly more than 2 times the $225 million that the Senate recommended. Perhaps some of the most notable differences are in the policy sections. The bill includes a number of MAPC priorities that passed one branch but not the other. A couple of those that were priorities of ours were the Downtown Vitality Fund. As it's written in this bill, it would be a $10 million fund to support the vitality of downtowns and main streets. MAPC supported the bill that would have funded this program through a portion of the collected sales tax from online retailers. This version would instead use bond funding. We were also excited to see that SAFE 2.0, or the Statewide Action for Public Health and Excellence, Policy provisions would be would ensure that minimum public health standards for every community, increase capacity and effectiveness, was included by encouraging municipalities to share services, create a uniform data collection and reporting system, and would also establish a sustainable state funding mechanism to support local boards of health and regional health departments. Other policies of note that were included were juvenile jurisdiction, which raises the maximum age which an individual can be charged as juvenile from 18 to 19, local option for happy hour, a more streamlined process for foreign trained physicians to practice in the Commonwealth, which was also included in the governor's bill, a live theater tax credit, which would create a pilot program to support productions that are headed to Broadway or off Broadway or national tours, and civil service reform, which makes changes to existing civil service system and allows municipalities to draw from a broader list of applicants for firefighters and police. One of the things that we're really excited about that was included in all three bills was language that empowers local housing authorities and other governmental bodies to conduct a single procurement for the design and installation and service of broadband, which MAPC has long advocated for. So that's the ECDEV bond bill. One of the other big bills that still could potentially get over the finish line is the siting bill. MAPC was honored to participate on the governor's commission to accelerate siting and permitting of clean energy infrastructure. These discussions and recommendations developed in concert with nonprofits, labor, utilities, and others helped provide some structure for this bill. MAPC was pleased to see several reforms we supported included in the bill, such as the creation of a public participation office, the creation of a new clean energy infrastructure dashboard, and the consolidation of permitting to help get these new renewables online as quickly as possible. We're excited that both versions of the bill included a clarification around EV bus procurement, which is something many municipalities have contacted us about. Currently, municipalities must go through multiple procurement processes to purchase or maintain or charge electric buses. This can be costly and time-consuming. Some of the other areas that still need to be hammered out in the conference committee are a ban on third-party energy suppliers, an update to the existing bottle bill, which expands it and increases the deposit from 5 cents to 10 cents per container, a addition of the drought management task force, and regional representation on the energy facility siting board, which would give a representative from the Massachusetts Association of Regional Planning Agencies an opportunity to sit on that board. I also want to touch briefly on the federal funds bill as well. There's an unprecedented amount of competitive funding available through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, Inflation Reduction Act, and CHIPS and Science Act. MAPC has seen firsthand several of the issues and the struggles that municipalities face when attempting to apply for federal funding, including insufficient matching funds and a lack of staff capacity to take on the onerous grant writing and grant management process. While MAPC and the other RPAs have capacity to assist with the latter, matching funds can put an undue strain on municipal budgets and require town meeting approval. In February, Governor Healy filed a bill which would allow the state to use interest generated from the Commonwealth's rainy day fund, approximately $750 million, for state and local matching funds. The bill also includes $12 million for technical assistance as well. The difference in the two branches versions are small. The Senate includes language that would allocate some of the funding to the Commonwealth's pension liabilities fund and the state retirees benefit trust fund. The House version does not include that language. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Leah, who's going to talk about a couple of the other pending bills.
Hi, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to be pretty brief. The supplemental budget continues on its merry way. That is something that happens kind of at the end of most fiscal years where there's some additional pieces that need to be funded further. These are usually services accounts. So in past years, a lot of times shelter has happened in that account. The Municipal Empowerment Act is one that is near and dear to our hearts at MAPC. The governor and lieutenant governor filed this bill during the session. It includes a plethora of tools for cities and towns. It is not yet passed either branch. It is still under review by committee. But we wanted to mention it here because there are so many gems for cities and towns that I know many of you have been talking with your legislators about throughout the session. One of the ones in particular is the remote and hybrid meeting flexibility extended permanently for cities and towns. Right now, that was adopted during COVID as under the emergency order, and then has subsequently been extended. And right now that extension is set to run out in March of next year. There's also some really great data reporting that we are watching very closely at MAPC around Uber and Lyft and meal deliveries, and some pieces around procurement. So we are still watching that and having many conversations to see what can happen there. And then substance use disorder is another bill that is in conference committee, much like the others on this list. And this bill offers several options for combating drug and alcohol substance abuse disorders, including at like insurance coverage, legalizing the use of fentanyl testing strips in certain situations, which I know has come up from some of our municipal members, and expanding access to naloxone and similar products. So these are, again, some of the bills that are in conference committee, and then there are many others that are under review by committees that are still under consideration by the legislature, and they are meeting all the time in informal sessions and having discussions about these different bills. Next slide. We're almost at the end. We've been getting some great questions through the chat, and we want to take a few minutes to turn to those and make sure that we are getting some great information out to all of you. So I know been a couple questions around housing. So Matt, I'm hoping you might be able to talk a little bit. One of the questions was around condo conversion from Kathleen Battetti, and I apologize if I pronounced that wrong, asking if we can share more about the condo conversion law and what this change will do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Leah. And thank you, Kathleen, for the question. So the change in the condo conversion law, basically, there are a number of protections instituted, I believe it was in 1983 initially, to protect folks who are currently in rental housing that the owner of that rental housing wants to turn into condos. Previously, buildings with 1 to 4 units were exempted completely from the law. It was only if there were 4 or more units that they would be subject to these protections. The protections include, protections against immediate evictions, protections against steep rent increases to kind of evict those folks through other means, and also protections that would allow the current tenants the right of first refusal, so that they would be able to make or match an offer for the condo that the person is hoping to convert. So those are just a few of the protections, and essentially now what has changed is those 1 to 4 unit buildings are no longer exempt universally, and only owner occupied buildings are exempt from these. So if you are an investor and you don't live in the building that you're trying to condoize, you're still subject to all of those restrictions. However, if you own and live in, say, like a triple decker, you are not subject to those restrictions. And I'll just briefly, I think I answered this more or less, but I'll turn to one other question that we got from Keith Bergman, who is just a real MAPC stalwart. Thank you, Keith, for being on today. And that's, what's the future prognosis for a real estate transfer fee for affordable housing? As I mentioned, I think, the real estate transfer fee and a number of other pieces of legislation that are components that didn't make it into the Affordable Homes Act made it further than they ever have. Particularly, I think seeing the local option real estate transfer fee included by the governor in the bill that she proposed is huge. And I think we got a lot of important conversations started about the policy this session, built a lot of camaraderie among different communities looking to use a real estate transfer fee, and also just like we're seeing a lot more home rule petitions. So I think the momentum is with us, and it's just about staying the course.
To switch to one more housing question, Matt, there's a question from Peggy Owen Sands about provisions for housing for individuals with disabilities within the monies for housing. I think that's a lot. With the supportive housing funds could also be used for folks with disabilities. Are there other funds that folks might want to be aware of?
Yeah, so there are a lot of, within the broader these broader funding pools, there are little cutouts and prioritization for projects that do house folks with disabilities. I Frankly, there are a lot of funding pools that I probably don't know about off the top of my head that do that as well. But I think Leia is right to point to supportive housing in particular. And I would also point to the housing authority investments, because a lot of those are going to be accessibility upgrades, or, you know, if they're not directly ADA compliance upgrades, they'll be upgrades that will make it easier for folks with disabilities to live in those buildings comfortably. So I hope that more or less answers your question.
Thanks, Matt. There was also a couple questions about the siting and climate bill. And that is one that we've had many conversations with legislators and in many coalitions urging support for. And one of the questions was, what can folks do to urge that particular conference committee to come to conclusion? I know, Lizzie, you're particularly close to this issue. You sat on the siting commission that came up with a lot of the recommendations. What having sat around that table and now following the legislation, what is your perspective that you would want to share with folks?
Sure. I'm glad to kick that off, Leah, and then I'll turn it to Norman to see if he has other pieces to add. You know, I actually think the commission recommendations, there was a lot of support across the commission for many of the pieces that were included in the legislation. And everything I've heard is that it's actually, we're pretty close to getting that across the finish line. I think some of the things to highlight there, we already discussed some of them, but particularly around thinking about siting, much more thoughtful considerations for municipalities to kind of make considerations and decisions around siting, and to try to increase and improve the very long timeline that so many of our municipalities have faced when they're trying to do siting and permitting of clean energy infrastructure. And I feel like those pieces are really poised to get across the finish line soon. And I think for those of you who are interested in engaging in advocacy on the bill, I think it's really important to weigh in with legislators and remind them that unless we actually unlock this siting and permitting policy changes, it's going to be another couple of years before this clean energy infrastructure comes online, because it still takes a long time to make sure that we're getting it right. And so really the time to move the legislation is right now. And I think it's important for legislators to hear that there's actually a lot of common ground there across from advocates and from municipalities, that we need to move the legislation right now.
Totally agree with Lizzie. I think that now is the time to sort of make your voice respectfully heard by folks in the legislature, and sort of sharing that how important this bill is. I think, you know, again, we're closer each passing day, we're closer to 2030 and 2050, and so making sure that we are hitting those goals is going to take a lot of work from the public, the private, the government sectors, and this is one way that can do that. I know that a lot of work has been put into this, and we're just excited to see it get over the finish line. But making sure that it is known, you know, that you're supportive of this, I think is always helpful. Right.
I see there's a question about the Small Properties Acquisition Fund, and Matt, you look like you were starting to type an answer. Would you want to? This is from Emily DeHoog, wondering about if you say a little more about the fund and who that fund targets.
Yeah, absolutely. So the fund, it exists already. It existed in kind of a pilot state, and is administered by CDAC. The fund is essentially aimed to helping nonprofit housing organizations acquire properties with 1 to 8 units of naturally occurring affordable housing. And yeah, I'm happy to send in response to that just the link to CDAC's page, so you can get like a little bit more into the nitty gritty of the program overview, applications, etc. And I'd imagine things will change a little bit with this $10 million coming in the door, but that link should give you a good overview of the details, which if I tried to go through all of them now, we would take quite a bit of time. So I'll pop that in the chat, but those are the basics.
Thank you so much, Matt. That's really helpful. There's so many provisions of that bill. It just grew overnight in so many ways. Around housing, there was also a question around what supports there are for smart growth provisions. Question comes from Eric Hinderly, wondering about supports and also MBTA multifamily supports that may have been included within the bill. Is that something that you have on hand?
Yeah, I gotcha. So yeah, 40R incentives were doubled in the bill, which is really huge. That's one of the things where, like, I always say this bill is too long for us to include everything that we care about. It really is. There's so much good stuff in it, and this is one of the things that fell off. But yeah, that's huge. And just in general, across the board, housing funding is conditioned on compliance with MBTA communities, which is exactly what we would hope to see. If you want funding to build housing, you should probably be doing it in the way that the state deems legal. You should probably be up to the law if you want housing funding.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Yeah, I think that's one of those areas where MAPC really doubles down is how do we make sure we're building in areas that are best suited within communities? How do we make sure that incentive mix is really there for development that works for communities? So thank you for pointing out those programs. And it's definitely an area where we are going to be continuing to watch, because as Matt pointed out when he was talking, this is only the first step of, it was weird to say first step after how long it took to get here, but it's going to be a little bit longer before the money actually comes out the door for cities and towns. We'll have to work with the administration to see what they're going to fund in their annual capital plan for these different provisions. And in that same vein, I know there was a question about the ADU provision and compliance. And Greg, Fredericksville, I really appreciate your question and noting that, the administration is going to have to pay careful attention to when town meetings meet and what that looks like. I don't know for sure what the timing is for that compliance. I don't know, Matt, I feel like this is entering the land of speculation, which I really hesitate to do. But I know that that is an issue that we will for sure be raising with the administration when we have conversations. And I know that's something they're keeping in mind as well.
Yeah, so I think the major question is whether this the passage of this law preempts local zoning. Should it preempt? And I think we have reason to believe that it should, and that's as far as I think I'll go. We have reason to believe that it may preempt the local zoning. So in that case, it would be more of a cleanup of existing procedures afterwards that I don't think would be quite as time sensitive as February. But we are having conversations with HLC in the coming weeks. And Greg, I'm happy to follow up with you individually since it's of interest. And anyone else will have our contact on the end of our slides so that you can get those again. Feel free to reach out and we'll keep you in the loop. I think it's an evolving situation. And I think maybe nobody is quite 100% sure as yet what implementation will look like.
Yeah, I think that's exactly. I think that's right, Matt. We don't know yet. It's a big question for us on the regulation side, and we're trying to see what's going to happen. Yes, we have summaries of many of these different bills. We will make sure all of that gets to you in follow-up material. And so you have those summaries, and then you also have some template. I know we're talking a lot about reaching out to legislators. We'll make sure to arm you with some template text you can consider sharing. The one other question I think that's come through that we haven't had a chance to answer yet was wondering about the provisions related to the future of gas from Patrick Hanlon. And those are definitely pieces that we are watching very closely. MAPC has helped facilitate the Multi-Town Gas Leaks Initiative for a number of years. And that's looking both at gas safety and coordination with cities and towns, and trying to figure out how are we looking at our greater fossil fuel impacts. I do think, if it was passed in either branch, it feels like it is potentially in the mix. So I remain in an optimistic space for all of the many bills that could cross the finish line. But not naive. It's going to take conversations with legislators on all of these things in order for them to continue the steam that they've had all session to move forward. So I do think if it passed a bill, if it passed either branch, it does feel like it is on the table. I look to my team though to make sure that that's their sense too. Great. Okay. I look. Are there any questions that I'm missing that I feel like we're doing pretty good. With that, I think we can show the last slide. It's just our contact information. Please don't hesitate to reach out. Georgia Barlow is the missing member of the government affairs team, not on the call with us today. But please reach out at any time. We would love to hear your ideas for future events like this. We haven't done a wrap up like this in the setting before. So the more information from you, the more we can make sure this tailors to what you are hoping to learn in the future. So with that,
before we sign
yes.
off, I also just want to remind folks that when MAPC takes positions on legislative and policy priorities, we do that with input from our legislative committee and our executive committee. And so as this government affairs team is developing our legislative agendas and priority for next legislative session, it's just as important to hear from you about the priorities that you are considering. I did see a handful of questions in the chat and even just a little bit of discussion on my text threads about transportation, which I think might be a major priority for next legislative session. And we'd love to hear from all of you about what you're looking forward to, what you're hoping that the legislature will prioritize so that we can make sure that it's on our legislative agenda. So it reflects your priorities as well. And I also just want to take sort of the deputy prerogative to thank the team so much for their hard work this legislative session. It was, as it's always the case, it's a big slog through to the finish. We take legislative positions on hundreds of bills. We're very much in the mix inside the State House, and these are the 4 people who are responsible for getting MAPC's positions and priorities out there and hearing from all of you. So I just wanted to take a chance to thank them for that work.
Thanks, Lizzie. And then one last thing too, I swear one last. We look forward to seeing you at other events in the future with MAPC. We're going to have a fall council meeting, which is always a great in-person event. And there are a number of webinars coming up on everything from communications and climate work, from public cohort of making art public and what does that process look like for funding art, to the principles of community engagement. So a wide range of topics really reflecting, which you will also see in the breadth of bills that we're engaged in. I'm going to drop a link to the calendar there as well, so you'll have it. And with that, thank you guys so much for coming today.